The flower girl looks at the plant and asks if it's actually magic grass, while Harris just smiles, finally realizing the power behind his plant master ability, which usually only lets him appraise basic things like this. Harris thinks about how he spent his entire life trying to turn this mana-filled grass into real medicine, while Harris knows that with his research and his crew he can actually save the world. But then the dream ends. Back at the Reynard Sanctuary in the royal capital, Harris snaps out of it, totally confused about what's going on. His boss is screaming at him, saying he's already told him 1,000 times that he's fired. Harris stands there looking completely lost, just trying to process the news. The boss tells him their job is using healing magic, not wasting time on herb research, and he's done putting up with it. Harris tries to fight back, arguing that this research was his father's dream and could help the whole kingdom since healers are only in the capital, but the boss just shuts him down. He tells Harris to shut up, mocking the idea of helping poor people. The director, Dolenz Renard, just stares Harris down and asks if he really needs to spell out why he's being kicked out, acting like it's the most obvious thing ever. He says it's all about the money, admitting he hated how the guy before him ran things because those old methods were just too soft. Dolenz gets this creepy look on his face while bragging about how they're the only ones rich patients can turn to for healing magic. He starts losing it, explaining that if Harris actually makes medicine that everyone can use, their easy money is going to dry up. Harris stands there shaking, realizing this whole place is complete trash and he'll never finish his real work if he stays, so he finally gives in. He sets his ID card down on the desk and tells Dolenz he's quitting the sanctuary for good, but the boss isn't done being a jerk. He lights up a cigar and tells Harris to get lost before his research lab gets burned to the ground. Harris can't believe what he's hearing. He asks if the guy is actually serious and immediately bolts out the door to check on his stuff. By the time he gets there, the research shack is already covered in flames. He just stands there in total shock, watching all his hard work burn. As he's staring at the fire, someone walks up and casually tells him he's late, leaving Harris standing there with nothing left. The guys who set the fire just stand there laughing, saying it feels great to watch the shack burn for cutting into their profits. One of them calls Harris a weed and says the fire is just a parting gift from the director, making it clear that they're enjoying every second of this. Harris is losing it, swearing under his breath while the goons keep shouting that he needs to learn his place. He's not just going to stand there though, because as the guys scream that he's officially banned from the royal capital, Harris turns his back on them and bolts right into the flames. The heat is intense, and inside the lab everything is falling apart. Wood is snapping and crashing down around him, and Harris has to shield his face just to keep moving through the smoke. He can't stop now, not when he thinks about how his father's entire life's work is sitting in the middle of this mess. He remembers being in the lab with his dad back in the day, and the thought of losing that legacy is too much. He sees a notebook catching fire and reaches out for it, thinking about how they were finally so close to making the research actually work for people. But then, he spots something else, something even more important tucked away in the corner. He pushes deeper into the burning room, and even though the fire is spreading way too fast, he tells himself he has to get to that one specific item before the whole place comes down. He reaches into the shelf and grabs a small wooden box. Inside is a strange, glowing seed that's still perfectly intact. He's relieved it's safe, but the roof is starting to collapse, so Harris clutches the box tight and makes a break for the exit. He knows he has to save this thing no matter what, even if the whole building is about to bury him alive. Harris shields his eyes from the heat, clutching the book tight while the fire closes in. He can barely breathe, and then he wonders if he's reached his limit as he bolts for the exit. He looks back one last time and sees that everything else is already finished, so the entire lab just gives up and crashes down into a pile of burning wood and smoke. Harris stands there staring at the wreckage, unable to believe that every single thing he worked for just turned to ashes. He looks at the ruins with hollow eyes, thinking about the years of research and all the memories he shared with his teacher, and now his pride, his dreams, and every bit of hope he had are just gone. He turns his back on the mess and starts walking away from the capital, feeling like there's no place left for him in this world anymore. A sharp pain shoots through his arm, and he winces. The burns from the fire are finally starting to sting, making him realize he's already made it outside the royal capital. He's not even sure when he got this far, but the stinging in his arm is actually helping him clear his head. He looks around at the plants nearby, thinking he needs to find some magic herbs to treat the wound before it gets any worse. Harris uses his special eyes to scan the plants, seeing the magic flow through everything. He spots some vitality grass to help him heal and some blue plum grass for its water mana, exactly what he needs to get to work. He's had this plant master power for as long as he can remember, and it lets him see the hidden energy inside every leaf. He picks the 2 herbs, knowing that with these he can make a quick fix. He starts by roughly chopping up the vitality grass, remembering that these magic plants are really just normal weeds until someone knows how to use them. He's careful with the next step, wrapping the chopped bits inside a blue dew leaf. This kind of processing is the only way to turn raw plants into something useful, and once it's ready, he presses the wrap against his burned arm and pushes his own magic into it. The mixture turns into actual magic medicine right against his skin, making him think back to why he started all this. He wanted to make this tech cheap and easy to find so that even the poorest families could get help, but instead he's just standing there alone. He thinks about how many people out there are just like he used to be, people who have zero chance of paying for a real healer when they get sick or hurt. He gives a little laugh when he sees his arm is already totally fine. The potion worked perfectly, just like Master Gustav taught him, but thinking about the new world of medicine he promised to build makes him squeeze his fist until his knuckles turn white. He was so close to making it happen, and it feels like the dream was right there in his hands before everything fell apart. He sits out in the middle of nowhere, finally facing the fact that his life in the capital is done and he'll never be able to do his research there again. Harris sits on the ground checking his map, realizing he can't just walk away. He needs to check in on the patients he's been treating who couldn't travel to the capital, so he decides he can't leave them hanging when their lives are on the line. He makes a plan to head over to Risara's place first. It's a long walk, but he eventually makes it to the Entru's estate out on the edge of the kingdom. He finds Lord Bailey and Lady Risara and immediately apologizes for showing up out of nowhere, but the couple is happy to see him, with Bailey telling him he's welcome anytime. Risara can tell something is wrong though, and asks him if something happened back at the sanctuary, which leads to Harris standing by her bedside, finally getting ready to tell them the truth about being fired. He starts off by saying, actually, and explains the whole situation. Bailey is absolutely floored, calling the decision to kick out a talent like Harris a total move of idiocy. He's clearly pissed off on Harris's behalf, but Harris knows that if he keeps coming here for official treatments, it's just going to make Director Dolenz target this family too. Since the Entru's family are the nobles in charge of this whole area, Harris realizes that if he stays, the relationship between this territory and the sanctuary will probably fall apart. He knows Bailey has a duty to look out for his people as a lord, and he refuses to let the man get dragged into his mess. He decides right then that he'll find a way to get Lady Risara her medicine in secret, and he tells himself that their public connection has to end right here to keep them safe. It's the only way to protect them from the fallout. Bailey looks Harris right in the eye and tells him he hasn't even repaid the debt he owes him yet. Harris is caught off guard, but Risara just smiles and says she could never forget what he's done, because she remembers when every other healer gave up on her, but Harris still gave it everything he had. He used to stay up all night and work himself to the bone just to finish her medicine, and she tells him that both he and his research are truly something special. Bailey stands tall and says the rest of the world needs to recognize how good Harris actually is. Risara looks at him with so much kindness, saying she knows he'll be fine since she's seen his hard work firsthand, and she tries to say something to her husband, but Bailey cuts in and says he's already made a decision. He reaches out a hand and formally welcomes Harris into the Entru's family right then and there, which just leaves Harris standing there with his eyes welling up. He can't even believe this is happening. Bailey tells Harris not to sweat his messy history with the sanctuary because he's already come up with a solid plan, and he suggests that Harris should move to Delos village since the water and soil there are perfect for growing high-quality magic herbs. As he walks out of the room, Bailey tells Harris to let him handle talking to all the different places they've visited lately. So Risara looks over and says she's just happy to finally be helpful before calling out Harris's name. She holds his hand and says she's always needed his strength and still does, but now it's their turn to be strong for him. Risara whispers her thanks from the bed, and Harris can only manage to choke out a thank you in return while he breaks down in tears, gripping his shirt as the weight of everything they've done for him finally hits. A bit later, a carriage is waiting by the main gates of the estate to take Harris to his new home, and Bailey shouts after him, reminding him to never forget that they will always have his back no matter what, which makes Harris smile as he yells back that thanks to them, he's officially ready for a brand new start. Bailey watches the carriage fade into the distance, thinking to himself that Harris needs to hang in there because the world really needs people like him. Then he starts looking over the list of home visit patients Harris left behind. But as he reads through the names, he starts breaking a sweat realizing that with a lineup of patients like this, things in the territory are about to get pretty wild. The scene shifts to Delos village in the Kingdom of Noel, where the carriage finally pulls up to a quiet spot with windmills and small houses. But as soon as Harris looks out the window, a massive guy standing there tells him he doesn't recognize his face at all. It's the village chief, Russell, and he says it's pretty rare for anyone to visit a backwater place like this before asking Harris who he is. Harris hops out and introduces himself politely, telling the chief he was actually hoping to move in and live in the village, which surprises Russell, who calls him a weirdo but starts to welcome him to the community until he gets a closer look at Harris's outfit and stops mid-sentence, asking if he's actually a healer. Suddenly, the chief's face turns angry as he yells that healers have always just left poor people like them to die. Russell gets right in Harris's face, yelling about how he has a lot of nerve showing up there before demanding to know if he's actually a healer. But just then, a woman rushes up crying, begging Harris to help her daughter and promising to pay whatever it takes for the rest of her life. So Harris immediately agrees and moves to help, even though Russell tries to stop him from getting involved. He takes one look at the kid's high fever and the spots on her skin, realizing it's a bad case of red lizard disease that's already progressed way too far. And when the mom asks if she'll be okay, Harris tells her not to worry because they can still save her in time. He knows regular healing magic is too slow for this, so he reaches into his bag for the ingredients to make a special medicine, quickly mixing powdered snakehead grass with liquid from some boiled jinsetsu grass before wrapping the whole thing in Suzuka leaves. The villagers stand around confused as Harris starts pumping his own mana into the mixture to activate the cure. Then he gently tells the little girl to drink it all down once it's finally ready for her. A bright light covers the girl as she starts to heal, and she finally opens her eyes to call out for her mom while everyone watches in relief. The mother pulls her daughter into a tight hug, crying tears of joy as Harris stands back with a proud smile. She just keeps sobbing, saying thank goodness and how glad she is that her little girl is okay. The kid throws her hands up, shouting about how amazing it is and that the pain is completely gone now. So when the mom thanks him again, Harris tells her it's just part of the job and he's just happy she's better. Then he turns to the village chief, telling Russell that he doesn't need to worry about paying him for this. And while Russell stands there shocked, Harris explains that he's actually a magic herbalist instead of a healer. He shows them the plants, explaining that the medicine he used was a special mix made from common magic herbs, and he gets really fired up, saying he wants to make this medicine as good as magic so poor people don't have to die anymore. So he asks to stay in the village for research. He looks Russell straight in the eyes and begs for a chance, showing him just how serious he really is. Russell actually bows his head, admitting Harris isn't like those other greedy healers and apologizing for being such a jerk earlier. The little girl is all smiles as she yells for Harris to have good luck, and her mom stands by watching, while Russell lets him know he's more than welcome here, officially making Harris the magic herbalist a member of Delos village. Harris shakes hands with the chief and thanks him for the chance, feeling like things are finally turning around, thinking about how he couldn't get anything done back at that academy. But now he's finally with people who see what he's worth. He pumps his fist, knowing he can make his dreams a reality in this place while the villagers look on. Later that day in a different town, a bird flies over some fancy buildings carrying a letter, and it lands right by a merchant who thinks it's pretty rare to get a message from Lord Bailey like this. The merchant starts opening up the letter to see what the big news is, and it's a message to all peers saying Harris was fired from the sanctuary, but the Entru's family is going to support him with everything they've got. Stockwell can't believe what she's reading, looking completely shocked that Harris was actually fired from the sanctuary. Word about Harris spreads fast, and Jurek, a top-tier adventurer, immediately says she's down to help him out, while Victoria Entrus is caught off guard, asking if her own family is really putting their full weight behind him. Macti the mage starts thinking about the situation too, wondering if this means Harris is officially a free agent now, and even a high-ranking noble lady named Emma Spadia thinks Master Gustav's apprentice is definitely worth recruiting. Back at the estate, Lady Risara watches her staff scramble around with the news, knowing Harris's name is about to go viral, believing that everyone is finally going to see him for what he is, a first-rate magic herb pharmacist. In the village, things are looking up as Russell and the others welcome Harris with open arms, though a mysterious seed nearby might be more important than it looks. Harris is genuinely hyped to start over, even as Russell feels a bit bad for bringing a guy from the royal capital to such a small town, explaining that they don't have fancy inns, only an old shack on the edge of the village. But Harris is just happy to have a place that keeps the rain off. He looks out at the village with a smile, knowing this is the exact spot where his new life as a magic herbalist is going to take off. Russell stops by a tree and tells Harris they've finally made it to the spot, and as Harris looks at the old shack, he wonders if this is really where his new life is starting. Russell looks at the building and apologizes, saying he didn't realize the place had turned into such a wreck, while Harris just looks it over, but Russell tells him not to feel down about it and promises to help him get the house fixed up. Harris kneels down and grabs a handful of dirt, saying he's just happy to have the forest and the river nearby, feeling like his dream is finally going to happen as he looks at the soil. The chief gets curious and asks Harris how someone actually goes about growing magic herbs anyway. So Harris explains it's pretty much like growing normal veggies by tilling the dirt, though mana and magic energy are also a big deal. Russell hears that and grips his tool, saying he gets the idea now, and since that's the case, he gets totally fired up and tells Harris it's time to get moving and start farming. Russell looks up at the trees and says he wants to see it too, specifically a world where Harris's dream is actually real. He puts a hand on Harris's shoulder and asks if he's talking about a place where even poor people can be saved, and Harris replies that would be the best thing ever. The two of them get totally hyped and yell about making it happen. Harris thanks the chief for the help, feeling lucky to have people like Rosara and Lord Bailey watching his back. He takes a breather and thinks about how this spot, plus that special item he took from his dad's old research hut, is exactly what he needs. After a lot of hard work, they look at the finished farm rows, and Harris shouts that they finally got it done. The two of them just stand there smiling at each other. Then Harris pulls out a small box and says it's time to get started without wasting any more time. Russell looks at what's inside and gets confused by the logic, but Harris just smiles and asks if they look like seeds to him, confirming that they are, and they happen to be some very special ones. Harris looks at the special seeds, thinking about how they were left behind by his dad. They're supposed to be Alron seeds, but he isn't totally sure what to expect. Suddenly, the ground starts glowing, and Russell yells out as the dirt literally explodes with light right in front of them. Vines and flowers grow at crazy speeds, weaving into a human shape, and then a tiny girl with rose-petal hair appears in the middle of the garden. Harris just stands there with his mouth open, unable to move while the little girl starts to tip over, so Harris reaches out and catches her, making sure she's okay. He stares at her, trying to process that this kid is actually an Alron. She doesn't look like any monster he's ever seen, and then she suddenly jumps into his arms and screams "Papa," with a huge smile on her face. Russell just stands in the back looking completely lost, repeating the word "Papa" like he can't believe what he's hearing. Harris holds the girl out at arm's length and tells her to hold on a second, because he is definitely not her dad. The girl just smiles even bigger and explains that since she was born from his magic, that makes him her papa no matter what. Russell stares at the kid in total shock, asking how something like this could just pop out of a seed. Harris tries to explain that she's an Alron, basically a magical plant familiar, but even he seems a bit unsure of what's happening. He notices the little girl staring intensely at the old, broken-down shack in the distance and asks if she's worried about the state of the place. He admits that calling it a house is a bit of a stretch since it's basically falling apart and needs a ton of work. But then, the girl suddenly jumps out of his arms and yells that she's going to fix it herself. Harris just stands there making confused noises while she runs straight toward the ruins. He watches her go, wondering how a tiny kid is supposed to repair a whole building by herself. The girl reaches the shack and starts talking to it, saying she understands that it fell into ruin because it was lonely with no one living inside anymore. She looks at the old wood with a serious expression and tells the building that she's going to share her power with it. She tells the house to get well soon as a massive wave of light and sparkles starts to wrap around the entire structure. The old, rotting wood begins to transform and glow under her magic, leaving Harris and Russell completely floored. Russell yells that the place looks brand new and asks if that kid was seriously just having a conversation with a shed. The flower girl reaches into Harris's belt pouch and grabs a bunch of seeds. She says they should let all the little ones out too, and Harris watches her hold them out, asking if those are actually magic grass seeds. She just smiles at him, then tosses them into the air and tells them all to wake up. Suddenly, a massive garden of flowers and plants explodes into life, leaving both guys standing there in total shock. Russell says it's incredible and he knew she was special, but Harris is just thinking about how this isn't normal at all. The little girl just laughs and looks up at Harris, asking him if she's amazing. He gives her a pat on the head and tells her she's definitely amazing, thinking to himself that even though her power is crazy, she still just seems like a regular little girl. Russell just stands in the back looking completely drained by the whole situation. The village chief tells Harris he should just be happy he has such a cute daughter. Right as the girl yells out "Papa Harris," Harris gets all flustered and says being called Papa is pretty embarrassing, so he asks her to just call him by his name instead. She gives him a high five and cheers out a cute version of his name. He just smiles back, telling her it's nice to meet her. Harris looks at the girl and thinks about how she's just a normal kid despite her crazy powers, so he decides he wants to give her a cute name. Russell watches her and says that with the way she fixes houses and grows plants, she's basically like a goddess of the forest, which gets Harris thinking. The village chief pulls out an old amulet and mentions there's actually an old legend passed down around here about a village guardian named Lelishaldite, a forest god who supposedly turned a wasteland into a home by building houses and growing crops. Harris listens to the story and repeats the name Lelishaldite to himself, trying to shorten it down to something like Lelisha. He looks out at the trees and asks the girl how the name Lisha sounds to her. Just testing it out, she looks up at him with big eyes as he tells her that since they're borrowing it from a goddess, her name is officially going to be Lisha. She starts cheering and dancing around, shouting out her new name and saying she's Lisha now. Russell just watches her celebrate in the background and says it seems like she really likes it. So the name works. Harris holds out his hand and tells Lisha he's looking forward to working with her from here on out. Lisha looks up at Harris with a huge smile, telling him it's nice to meet him and calling him Harishu. She's officially a girl born from a magic herb now. Night falls on the village and a huge party starts up, with maids running around carrying trays of drinks for everyone under the moon. Russell gets up to give a formal speech, introducing the magic herbalist Harris and his new familiar Lisha to the whole village. But a guy in the crowd yells at him to wrap it because it's taking forever. The chief just laughs it off and agrees with them, so the whole village lets out a massive shout welcoming Harris and Lisha to their home. Everyone raises their beer barrels together, shouting cheers and knocking them back to start the celebration. The little girl Harris saved runs up with a plate of food, looking totally healthy as she tells him she's feeling all better now. Harris gives her a smile and says he's happy she's doing well, telling her to stop by again if she ever feels off. The kid is glad to hear it. But then she spots the little flower girl and asks Harris if this is the Lisha she heard about. Harris tells her it is and asks her to be a good friend to her, while Lisha looks a bit shy and asks the girl to be nice. The girl says it's nice to meet her and immediately grabs Lisha's hand, dragging her off to find some cake while Harris just watches them go. Harris watches Lisha and the girl walk off together with some cake. Happy to see that she's already been accepted by everyone in the village, Russell leans in with a big grin, asking Harris if he's having a good time, while some guy in the back shouts about how fast they're burning through the booze. Harris says he's having a blast because the food and drinks are both incredible, which makes Russell brag about how their local booze is famous even in the capital. The chief gets a little serious for a second and asks why the Holy Institute would ever fire a top-tier herbologist like him. Harris just gives an awkward laugh, saying he wishes the old director shared that opinion while he thinks back to the guy who kicked him out. Russell tells him that arrogant people usually ruin their own lives eventually, so staying honest like Harris is doing is really the best way to live. Harris takes another drink, thinking about how even if these people are a little rough around the edges, they're all solid at heart. Looking out at the party and the people cheering under the moon, Harris realizes he's actually really glad he decided to come to this village. The sun starts to peek over the rooftops after the party goes on through the entire night, leading into a pretty rough morning where everyone is passed out on the tables, including Harris who's slumped over a barrel, completely out of it. Harris sits slumped on a bench outside, admitting he definitely overdid it with the drinks, though he thinks to himself that it's been forever since he had a party this great. Lisha wanders over and asks if he's doing all right, and Harris can barely manage to tell her he's fine while hanging over the table. He realizes he has the perfect fix for this hangover, mentioning to Lisha that he grew some magic herbs yesterday, specifically a mix of cooling spring herbs and heat herbs to brew up a quick cure. After pouring out the herbal mix into a couple of mugs, the two of them knock it back together. Harris perks up instantly, pumping his fist and shouting about how much better he feels now that the fog has cleared. He gives Lisha a quick thanks for the help, and she strikes a proud pose, telling him he can always count on her for stuff like this. Harris decides to share the wealth and tells everyone else to give it a try, while a very hungover Russell asks what exactly he's drinking. The second the tea hits Russell's system, his eyes snap wide open as the medicine takes hold. The villagers start describing the feeling as something incredible, like running through a meadow by the sea or having a warm spring breeze blow right through them. Russell realizes that nasty heartburn he had is completely gone, and everyone makes sure to thank Harris and Lisha for saving them from a rough morning. Harris and Lisha share a quiet moment, looking pretty happy with how the morning turned out. And as everyone finishes their tea, they can't believe the power of magic medicine, noticing it works just as well for a hangover as it does for a real disease. Russell shouts that now he can drink as much as he wants without worrying, though Harris tries to tell him to keep it in moderation. But then a villager runs up shouting that they've got a huge emergency. The guy is out of breath, telling them a bunch of carriages with crests on them just pulled into the village, which leaves Russell sounding pretty confused about who would be visiting. The messenger draws a symbol in the air, describing a teardrop frame with scales inside, and he's almost certain that's the one he saw. Harris recognizes it immediately and asks if those are from the Stockwell company, but Russell doesn't buy it, telling him he must have seen it wrong since there's absolutely no way a massive name like that would ever bother coming to a middle-of-nowhere place like their village. It turns out it really is the Stockwell company, a world-class trading giant that doesn't usually go off the beaten path. But the line of carriages is already right outside, with the driver calling out that they've finally reached Delos village. A voice from inside the carriage offers a quick thanks, while the coachman tells them they did a great job handling such a long trip. Inside the lead carriage, Rome looks out at the quiet village. She can't believe Harris is actually staying in a place like this. As the head of the world-famous Stockwell Trading Company, Rome is convinced this is the moment their new medicine is finally going global. The doors open, and a huge group of suited staff steps out. It's the famous 88-suit Legion making a grand entrance in the middle of the village. Russell confirms the carriages are definitely from the Stockwell Company, but Harris is just confused, wondering why they brought such a massive crowd. The girl steps down from the carriage and Harris starts to recognize her, asking if she's really Rome. Her face lights up the second she sees him, and she yells out his name like she's been waiting forever. She doesn't even wait for the others, just starts sprinting toward them, while the guys stand there watching her run. She catches up and immediately grabs Harris's hands, telling him she's so glad they finally got to meet again. Harris looks totally thrown off by the sudden energy, and he awkwardly asks who this kid even is. Rome takes a second to calm down and bows slightly, apologizing for being so late with a proper introduction. Rome starts her pitch, telling Harris they can get him anything from basic breakfast bread to literal dragon nail clippers. The entire group of suited workers stands perfectly still behind her, looking ready for any order she gives. She officially introduces herself as the second-generation head of the Stockwell Trading Company, the best merchant alive right now. Then she realizes she might have moved too fast, mentioning she sent a message bird ahead, but her carriage beat it there. The little bird lands on her finger, hiccuping, while Russell explains the whole village is currently nursing a massive 3-day hangover. Loam looks around and praises how clear the air and water are, saying it explains why the local vintage wine is so good. She offers to help get the drink into wider circulation, but Russell quickly shuts her down, saying the recipe is a village secret. Russell is impressed she knows so much about a backwater town, and he asks who she really is while the Stockwell name rings out. Turns out it's the biggest guild in the entire kingdom, dealing in every kind of treasure and gear you can imagine. The founder, Kobe, built the whole thing from scratch in one generation, and now his 17-year-old child is running the show. Harris keeps the introductions going, explaining how Rome has been training since he was a kid. Turns out the kid's business logic even beats his father's, making him a top-tier merchant in his own right, which comes as a massive shock to Russell. The chief looks at Rome and says there's no way, because the kid clearly looks just like a girl. Rome just laughs it off and rubs the back of his head, mentioning that people actually make that mistake all the time. Harris doubles down and tells him that despite the looks, Rome is 100% a boy. Hearing the truth makes Russell and the other village guys completely lose their minds. They just can't wrap their heads around it. Even with the cute face and the flowery vibes, the facts are clear that Rome Stockwell is definitely a guy. Moving past the confusion, Harris tells everyone he's just glad to see that Rome is doing so well these days. It's a big deal because the Holy Institute had totally given up on Rome when he was a patient, leaving him for dead, until Harris stepped in with his special magic herbs. Rome is full of smiles now, telling Harris that he owes his life and his health to him. While everyone talks, Lisha stands to the side, just quietly watching the whole scene play out. Rome kneels down to get on Lisha's level, introducing himself with a friendly smile and asking what her name is. Lisha happily tells him her name and asks what brings him around, so Rome explains he's actually there for a visit with Harris. Harris is completely floored. He can't believe Rome showed up with a whole group from the guild and asks what's going on. Rome tells him to drop the act, explaining that as soon as he heard Harris got fired, he came flying over as fast as he could. The kid goes on a bit of a rant, scolding Harris for being way too careless when it comes to his own well-being. Rome gets serious, pointing out that now that Harris is finally free from the Holy Institute, his herb research can actually change the world, and gives a quick wink, telling Harris that they really want to get behind his research and support him. It's not just a favor though. Rome pats the supplies and makes it clear they'll set up a proper business deal, merchant style. He turns back to Harris, saying he wants to ask one more time if they can talk about the magic herbs, and Russell chimes in saying he's curious too, while the little girl waves her hand and yells that she doesn't want to be left out. Harris holds up a small, common-looking weed, agreeing with the group that it's nothing fancy, and goes on to explain that magic grass isn't some legendary plant. It's really just a normal weed you can find growing anywhere. The secret is how the plant works. It's built to soak up and store all different types of mana from the air, but usually that energy just vanishes into thin air unless you're a high-level mage who knows how to hold on to it. The weed changes the game though, because the mana trapped inside the magic grass stays stable and way easier to work with. Victoria takes a slow sip from her cup, thinking it over while she realizes it's like trying to carry water. You can't hold it in your hands, but the plant acts like a cup that lets you move it around. Harris is impressed and tells her she's sharp, explaining that if you mix these herbs just right, they can heal anyone even if they don't have a drop of magic. He shows off the crushed up mixture, calling it a magic herb potion, and Russell looks at the stuff in shock, asking if this is what Harris has been working on all these years. which the guy just calmly confirms. Loam agrees with the plan, while Harris explains that even though his appraisal ability lets him see what the plants do, he still hasn't figured out the right ways to mix or process them yet. Victoria realizes he's just testing every single combination and thinks that sounds like a total nightmare to sit through. She's honestly floored that basic weeds can actually be turned into legit medicine like this. The group decides to head out, and Harris gets all fired up, suggesting they go take a look at the fields together. The four of them head over to the garden fence to check on the progress. Victoria is pretty shocked at how fast everything is growing, especially since Harris only got to the village a little while ago. Harris just smiles and pats Lisha on the head, telling everyone that the fast growth is all thanks to her power, while she brags about how great she is. He admits he's actually a bit surprised by how well it's working as he reaches into a bag of seeds and hands some over to Lisha, telling her it's time to wake these kids up too. She gives him a quick salute and gets right to work. Victoria just watches her walk off, wondering what the heck he means by waking up a bunch of plants. Lisha jumps into the air with a loud shout, showing off her moves in the garden while Harris and the others watch. Victoria looks at the thriving plants and realizes that with Lisha's power on their side, Harris's research is going to move way faster than before. She explains that they're going to be able to create all kinds of magic elixirs to save patients who are usually considered incurable. And most importantly, once they figure out the process, they can make the medicine even if the person making it has zero mana or talent. Harris nods along, saying that's exactly the goal he and his father, Master Gustav, were always aiming for. Loam chimes in, explaining that with a versatile tech like this, the guild can handle mass production and distribution, so healing magic won't be the only option anymore. This basically means the Holy Temple is going to lose its monopoly on healing, and their whole system of absolute power is going to collapse. Victoria stands there in silence, finally realizing that the world is changing right in front of her eyes. The group stands together in the field, looking at the plants that represent a brand new future for everyone, so Victoria decides it's time to get down to business, reiterating that the Stockwell company is fully prepared to back Harris's herbal research. Harris tells them this is better than he ever hoped for, but he asks if they're actually sure about it, since teaming up with him means throwing away their relationship with the Holy Academy for good. Victoria doesn't hesitate, saying she already expects that to happen and she's totally fine with parting ways with them. Harris thinks back to the day they kicked him out and burned all his research results, leaving him to start from scratch with nothing but his own memory and experience to go on. Victoria is disgusted, saying the Academy doesn't just fail to value the potential of magic potion, they actually went as far as sabotaging him in such a messed up way. Loam joins in, explaining that the temple's ego and the way they've been running things has finally pushed their guild to the breaking point, and he points out that business is supposed to be built on trust, something they definitely can't count on from the Holy Temple anymore. Victoria looks at Harris and tells him she trusts him because he's the guy who saved her life, and she admires how he still wants to save others even after they burned his work to ashes. Village Chief Russell watches them and realizes it's not just about the money for Victoria, she's just another person who's been completely won over by Harris. Victoria grips her crest, promising that she's going to support Harris both as a person and through her work as a merchant. She explains that the Stockwell philosophy is all about business that helps the seller, the buyer, and society, making sure everything stays fair and balanced for everyone. Victoria opens up about her past, explaining that Harris actually went against everything the Holy Academy stands for just to save her life. Because of that, she spent all this time leveling up her merchant skills just to pay him back. She's convinced that by combining his high-level research with her family's massive funding, they're finally at the point where magic potions will take over the world. She reaches out a hand to him, practically glowing as she tells him they should change the world together. Harris looks out at the horizon, thinking about how crazy it is to be walking the same path as the person he's thinking of. He realizes he can save way more people this time around, especially since he's working with the same boy he saved a long time ago. So he reaches out his hand, telling her he definitely wants in on this deal. They lock in the partnership with a handshake, and Harris tells her he's really counting on her to make this happen. A few days pass, and the quiet village is suddenly buzzing with noise as a huge wooden frame for a new building goes up. Village Chief Russell can barely believe his eyes, standing there in shock that a branch of the world-famous Stockwell company is actually being built in a place like theirs. Victoria is right there with him, thanking the village for letting them set up the new headquarters for their magic herb division. Seeing all this progress gets Harris thinking, and he asks the group if they should start looking into expanding their own business operations as well. Chief Russell is right in the middle of talking about herb production when a villager interrupts. Shouting that there's a massive emergency, the chief turns around and looks totally annoyed, asking what could possibly be going on now. The guy catches his breath and explains that the group out gathering materials just got jumped by a huge monster. Harris and the others can't believe what they're hearing, and Harris asks him to repeat what just happened out in the woods. A massive, muscular orc lets out a roar as it swings its club around. One of the workers barely dives out of the way as the huge weapon smashes into the dirt right next to him. His buddy runs over to check on him while he sits there dazed and bleeding from the head. They start hauling him away, shouting for everyone to run while hoping Harris can patch up the wounds once they get back. The guys realize they're dealing with 3 orcs at once, which is crazy because high-rank monsters never show up this close to the village. They keep moving as fast as they can, knowing they need to reach the village and get a message to the capital's guild before things get even worse. It turns out that whole suits thing was just the start. Now there's an entire army of orcs invading the area. Harris mentions he heard about 3 orcs showing up, and the village chief completely loses it. Asking if everyone is okay, one of the guys who managed to escape says the monsters are right behind him and heading straight for the village. Chief Russell says they're going to stop them right here, calling for anyone who can swing a weapon to follow his lead. At the same time, the word gets out to the adventurers at the guild to help evacuate everyone and get a message to the capital. Harris knows there's going to be a lot of blood, so he tells Russell he's coming along to help the wounded. They find a group of villagers pretty quick, and Harris rushes over to start checking out their injuries. The guys are thankful they made it, but one of them says there are still people trapped further up the path. Russell tells Harris to stay and focus on the medical stuff while he handles the heavy lifting. He grabs his axe with a grin, saying he was a legit adventurer back in the day and can handle a few orcs easily. Harris tells the villager to get moving and stay safe, promising that he's a lot tougher than he looks while he finishes patching up the guy's arm with some medicine, telling him his wounds are good enough for him to head back to the village. The man thanks him for the help but tells him he needs to watch his back out there, so Harris promises he'll be careful, saying they've got Russell and the best guards on their side to keep things under control. But the guy looks completely terrified and tells him the situation isn't what they think at all. He explains that there aren't just a few orcs roaming around, it's actually a massive horde, and Harris just stands there in shock. Up ahead, Chief Russell is already locked in a brutal fight, barely blocking a heavy smash from one of the monsters. One of the other fighters yells out that the numbers are way off, realizing they're facing at least 20 orcs instead of 3. Victoria starts to panic a bit as she looks at her supplies, knowing the odds are bad and she's almost out of magic tools. Things get worse fast when an orc sneaks up on her, and Russell has to yell at her to look behind her before it's too late. Victoria sprints through the woods holding a seed. She's terrified she's not going to make it in time as she screams for Lisha to take the seed, throwing it toward her with everything she's got, and vines suddenly explode out of the ground, wrapping the orc in a thick, thorny trap. Harris shows up right then, relieved he made it, while Victoria thanks him for the save and wonders what kind of plant this is. Harris explains that it's called vine bindweed, a crazy magic plant that can actually crush entire buildings, and he admits he only thought of using it because of Lisha's plant growth powers. Though the victory feels short because the orc starts flexing, its huge muscles beginning to snap the vines like they're nothing. Harris realizes that against that much brute force, they're really only buying time, but he promises to keep supporting them. The situation is looking pretty grim. Harris mentions they're almost out of herbs and the group is still totally outmatched, so Chief Russell makes the call, telling everyone they're about to get overrun and need to retreat immediately. Harris and the others watch from a distance, as Jurek positions herself right behind the massive orc, ready to move like a flash, delivering a deep cut to the orc's throat that sends blood spraying everywhere, as she calmly tells the group to just hang on a second while she finishes cleaning up this mess. And Harris can't help but stare at the girl in the hood, wondering who she actually is as she dives straight into the middle of the pack, sliding past their weapons with insane speed. Harris can't even process what he's seeing. Jurek is flipping through the air, taking out multiple targets at once, and she just walks away calmly while the orcs behind her finally collapse from her lightning-fast strikes. And Harris recognizes her and asks if that's really Jurek. Russell is totally blown away, asking who she is since she's so strong, so Harris explains that she's part of the Steel Fangs. Specifically, she's the daughter of their leader, Zoan, who runs the All-Beastmen clan. Russell realizes they're a top-tier group. It makes sense why she's treating 20 orcs like they're nothing, just tearing through them. Jurek stands right in the middle of the mess. 20 orcs are scattered across the ground, completely wiped out by the girl's crazy speed. Russell and the villagers can't even find the words to describe what they just saw, and Jurek just turns back toward the group with a casual thumbs up. She's the real deal, a top-tier adventurer through and through. She walks over and tells Harris it's been a while. He thanks her for the save, but he's confused about why she's even in the area, so Jurek explains she heard he moved to the nearby village. She saw things getting messy on the road and figured she'd lend a hand, but Harris is still shocked. He asks why she's visiting now when her clan is supposedly right on the edge of clearing the Stardust Labyrinth. Jurek just smiles and tells him that he's a huge benefactor to the whole Steel Fang group, and adventurers never forget a debt. Harris notices she's still totally calm after the brawl. Jurek admits it was Harris who taught her to stay cool and assess the situation, and she remembers back to when she was just a rookie. She got too confident and ended up in a bad spot, forcing her father to jump in and protect her. In the flashback, a doctor looks at her dad's leg and says it's basilisk venom, and the only way to save him is to cut it off. The healer yells that if Jurek's dad loses his leg, his career is finished. Little Jurek is a total wreck, crying and saying it's all her fault that she grabs the healer's coat, begging him to save her father, but the guy just turns his back and starts walking away. He snaps at her, calling her annoying and saying if they're so set on keeping the leg, they can just go ahead and die together. Jurek is left standing there alone, sobbing and barely able to get a word out. Suddenly, a younger Harris runs right past the jerk healer, bursting into the area and demanding to see the patient right now. Harris looks at Jurek's dad and realizes the poison and petrification are spreading together. He figures if he uses his dad's research, he can treat both at once, while Jurek keeps crying for help. Harris gives her a look of pure confidence and tells her he's going to cure him, so she should just watch him work. He starts opening his medical kit and explains that the cockatrice poison has to be treated at the same time as the petrification. He asks the little girl if she's ready to help him out, patting her on the head like a big brother. He tells her she's a good girl, but first she needs to wipe her tears and stay calm. They start the treatment together, with Harris explaining how to rub in the cure while the antidote hits. He watches her work and gently tells her to slow down a little. Harris stays focused on the treatment, telling Jurek she needs to stay calm while they work. The little girl locks in, telling herself she has to assess the situation, and Harris follows his training, making sure he takes all the right steps to stop the poison from spreading any further. The two of them work through the night, and as the sun rises, they finish up. Suddenly, Zoan leaps off the bed, flexing his muscles and roaring with life. Zoan pulls his daughter into a huge hug while she cries happy tears, all because Harris's treatment worked perfectly to bring him back, and back in the present, Jurek finishes telling the story to the group, looking like she's reliving that moment all over again. She explains that Harris didn't just save her father's life that day, he also saved her from falling into total despair. Tears well up in her eyes as she looks at him, filled with more respect and gratitude than she can even put into words. She tells everyone that since her hero was fired so unfairly, it's only natural for her to be the one to step up and help him now. Jurek tells him to leave all the rough stuff to her and her team, and Harris just smiles back, telling her it's a huge relief to have her around. Zoan is looking pretty relieved, telling the group they ended up needing help with the muscle work way sooner than he thought. He admits it's exactly what he expected from a crew like the Steel Fangs, and he keeps the good vibes going, laughing about how they can handle anything that shows up now. Harris looks a bit stressed though, telling the big guy to stop jinxing them before something actually happened. With the area finally clear of orcs, Zoan decides it's time for everyone to pack it in and head back to the village, already shouting about throwing another massive feast the second they get home. Jurek can't even believe it, asking if they're really going to party again so soon. But as the group starts to move out, Jurek completely freezes up. Harris notices her trailing behind and calls out her name to see what's wrong, but she just stares into the trees, telling him the fight isn't over yet. She explains that orcs usually stick to small groups, and seeing a horde this big isn't normal at all. Harris starts to get a bad feeling as he repeats her words, and right then, a flock of birds suddenly freaks out and flies off, leaving Jurek to confirm his worst fears as she draws her daggers. She's locked in now, telling him the leader is finally showing its face. The whole group drops into a defensive circle, weapons ready, as Jurek warns everyone that they're about to have company. A massive, terrifying Orc Lord crashes through the trees with a giant blade in hand, and just like that, the real fight begins. Harris yells for the team to take down the final boss, but Jurek knows this thing is on another level. She tells everyone to stay back and says she'll handle this alone, then a massive blast of wind from the monster's swing hits them. Harris and the others get tossed back like they're nothing, struggling to even stay on their feet. Harris can't believe the impact came just from the pressure of the sword. It turns out an Orc Lord is a rare leader with insane power that stands way above the rest, making it a disaster-class monster capable of wiping out an entire village. Harris is stuck wondering why something that dangerous would even be out here, while Zoan admits he totally underestimated the size of this threat. Jurek tries to move in, but the shockwaves are so intense she can't even get close to the beast. Zoan watches the struggle, feeling completely useless and wishing there was something he could do to help Jurek out. Suddenly, Lisha takes off running toward the fight. Harris is caught off guard and yells her name as she disappears into the chaos, nearly getting taken out by a flying piece of debris. She barely dodges the rock and tells herself that was way too close. Harris rushes over to her side as she hits the ground, frantically asking if she's okay after a move like that. Lisha looks back with a scratch on her face and a look of total focus. She tells Harris that his friend is doing her best out there, so she has to do her part and help too. Harris watches Lisha risk everything and decides he can't just stand there hesitating anymore. He tells her he's ready to do whatever it takes and asks her to tell him how he can help. Then he asks if she'll lend him a hand for a plan. Lisha is all in, even while Jurek is still in the back doing everything she can to stay in the fight. Zoan yells out, wanting to know what Harris is up to, while Victoria shouts that whatever he's doing is way too dangerous. But Harris ignores them and throws some seeds toward the monster, telling Lisha to take care of them. The seeds instantly explode into thick, thorny vines that wrap around the Orc Lord. The beast gets tangled, and Jurek rushes in to strike while it's stuck. Russell notices the monster isn't even flinching despite the vines, and Victoria looks on, getting more worried by the second. Victoria tells Harris to look at Lisha's face, and he realizes something is wrong. Lisha looks completely drained, making Harris wonder if he pushed her too far. He realizes she doesn't have infinite magic and she's hitting her breaking point. He stops to think and remembers Lisha was born from a seed using his own magic. If that's how it works, then he grabs her and asks if she can just use his magic power directly to keep the fight going. Lisha looks him right in the eye and tells him it's not much, but he should take everything she's got. Harris doesn't hesitate and says he's going to use that power, so Lisha smiles and thanks him, saying she feels like she can keep going now. The two of them are finally in sync, and Harris holds her close while they watch the thorny vines surge forward like they've got a life of their own. Harris knows that just stalling for time is the best he can manage against a normal orc strength. Dealing with an Orc Lord makes even buying a few seconds feel almost impossible, but he figures if he can just distract the big guy for a tiny bit, it might be enough to turn things around while the Orc Lord struggles against the magic plants, trying to tear himself free from the trap. Jurek sees the opening and tells Harris that the distraction is actually a huge help. She's locked in and ready to move because Harris realizes they've got Jurek back in the mix now. She leaps high into the air, coming down on the monster like a shadow. She draws her daggers mid-flight, focusing everything on one clean strike. The blade cuts deep into the Orc Lord's neck, sending blood flying while Harris and Lisha watch from below. The massive Orc Lord finally gives out, falling forward as blood sprays everywhere. Harris and Lisha stand back and watch the monster hit the dirt. The whole group starts cheering. Russell raises his axe high while everyone celebrates the win, but Harris just stands there looking completely drained. He tries to get a word out, but his legs give way and he begs for help as he starts to drop. Lisha and Victoria both scream his name when they see him faceplant into the ground. Russell leans over him and realizes the guy is totally out of mana. He can't believe Harris was reckless enough to use it all up. The team decides to get Harris back to the village so he can sleep it off. They divide up the luggage and plan to report the attack to the capital, totally unaware that a mysterious girl is watching them from the trees. She identifies Harris as the magic herb apothecary and thinks to herself that his little group looks like they're going to be a real handful to deal with later on. She hops down and stands on the dead monster, annoyed at the mess they made of her favorite orcs. But she figures she's done enough for one day. She decides it's time to head back to a nearby mansion and report everything to her bosses. The glass hits the table with a loud crack as a hand grips it tight. It's Dolenz, and he's absolutely losing it over the latest sales reports. He demands to know why the numbers are so pathetic and asks if the staff is even trying to squeeze every last cent out of their patients anymore. One of the goons tries to explain that they're doing their best, but the problem is that people just aren't showing up like they used to, which only makes Dolenz even angrier. He looks like he's about to pop a vein, snapping back that injuries and sickness don't just magically go away on their own. Then a creepy look crosses his face as it finally clicks. He realizes that Harris, the guy he threw out, is the one causing all this trouble, and it turns out Harris has been getting close with the Stockwell Company and the Steel Fang Group. Dolenz is convinced the guy is trying to wreck their deal with the Holy Institute on purpose. He leans over his desk, whispering Harris's name over and over while trying to wrap his head around how things got this bad. His staff drops another bomb, mentioning there are rumors that Harris is even making moves to team up with the Spadia family. Dolenz slumps over, totally stunned by the name Spadia. He starts thinking about that arrogant noble who wouldn't sign an exclusive deal with them, and he just snaps. He stands up screaming Harris's name, calling him a spoiled piece of trash and an eyesore who should have stayed digging in the dirt where he belongs. Dolenz turns his back on his men. He doesn't think a high-ranking family like the Spadias would actually deal with a loser like Harris, but he's not taking chances and wants the guy handled before things get worse. He grips his glasses, his face twisting into a nasty grin as he mumbles about Harris being a total brat. He's completely lost it, swearing right then and there that he's going to crush the guy for good. Fast forward a few days later, and things are looking a bit better. Harris is finally back on his feet outside his place. He lets out a little groan while stretching out his arm in the bright morning sun. He flexes a bit, feeling like himself again, and tells the others he's finally back to 100%. He makes sure to thank them, saying those magic herbs did the trick and fixed him right up, though he feels bad for all the trouble. Victoria isn't letting him off that easy though. She gets right in his face, looking pretty heated. She tells him she's being dead serious and demands he never pulls a stunt that reckless ever again. While Chief Russell watches on, Jurek looks over the herbs they gathered. She asks if this is the right batch, mentioning they're lucky they had Harris's notes. Victoria leans in close, trying to figure out if she just needs to grind them down. Victoria keeps going, talking about how stressed she was trying to cook up a new recipe on the spot. She admits she trusts Harris and his work, but making a potion like that under pressure was way too much for her. Harris just laughs it off. He's looking pretty proud while he holds up a flask. He starts talking about his big goal of making a world where anyone can whip up their own medicine, and he's surprised the first real step happened so fast. He tells her he's just glad they proved his theory works for regular people too. Victoria isn't having it and starts yelling at him again. She's fine with the medicine working, but she's definitely not okay with how he almost got himself killed. The vibe changes fast when Jurek suddenly spots something out the window. She calls Harris over, telling him she heard someone screaming and the sound of weapons clashing just outside the village walls, and everyone immediately goes on high alert. Jurek isn't wasting a single second. She says it sounds like real trouble and tells Harris she's heading out first, so he needs to keep an eye on the magic herbs while Harris shouts back that he's on it and promises to catch up as fast as he can. Victoria and Lisha look on as the cat girl disappears into the distance, leaving the rest of the group to scramble, sprinting past a very confused Russell. The chief starts running too, asking Harris what the big rush is all about. Harris calls out to him while they push toward the village gates. He explains that Jurek heard someone screaming from way outside the village, and she's already gone on ahead to check it out. Russell can't believe that girl has such crazy hearing, but as they crest a hill, Victoria spots the chaos and asks if that's the place. By the time they get there, Jurek is standing over the bandits she just wrecked. As the rest of the group finally catches up to the scene of the ambush, Harris calls out to Jurek to find out what exactly they're dealing with. Jurek reports that they've already taken care of the dozens of bandits on this side of the road. Harris turns to a battered guard by a carriage, asking if they were the ones attacked. Noticing the man is bleeding pretty bad, Harris rushes over with his gear and tells him to stay still so he can check out those wounds. The injured guard looks pretty rough. He apologizes for messing up and letting his guard down, then asks Harris if he's actually a healer. Harris gets his kit ready and says he isn't exactly a healer, but he tells the guy to just relax and leave the treatment to him. He pulls out a special plant and presses it right onto the wound. A huge flash of light goes off, surprising everyone. The guard is completely floored by the feeling, realizing this definitely isn't normal healing magic and wondering what's going on. Harris explains that he's using magical herbs. It's a whole new way of doing medicine, and he says the quick results speak for themselves. As Harris finishes up, a voice from inside the carriage repeats the words magical herbs like it's something they've been waiting to hear. A noble girl in a fancy dress steps out of the carriage to get a better look at the guy helping her guard. The guard calls her Lady Emma as she walks over. She looks at Harris and asks if he's the famous magic herbalist she's heard about. Harris looks a bit caught off guard by the attention, but he confirms that he is indeed the man she's looking for. Emma looks incredibly relieved and tells him she's so glad she finally found him, starting to explain that her family needs his help. Emma looks him right in the eyes and asks if he'd be willing to form a pact with her, and Harris is just standing there totally frozen. He's sweating like crazy while she holds his hand and looks up at him with these big, hopeful eyes, waiting for an answer. Behind them, the whole crew is just watching the scene unfold. Lisha and Jurek look pretty confused, while Victoria is basically dying of embarrassment for them. A huge collective scream suddenly rings out across the whole village. It's a lot to take in, especially since Harris was just a regular guy who got kicked out of the Reynard Holy Institute because the place was local-level corrupt and full of jerks. He ended up moving out to the remote village of Delos, where he actually found a home thanks to the people he helped out in the past like Lord Bailey and even the grumpy village chief. Since moving there, he's had all these new encounters and reunions with people like Victoria, Jurek, and of course, Lisha. He even managed to save the village from a massive orc invasion that was causing everyone nothing but trouble. And after all that, he finally decided he was going to dedicate his life to spreading magic herb medicine to the world. He wanted to show everyone a better way to heal that didn't involve the corrupt church, but just as he made that big life decision, this happened. Emma is still standing there holding his hands, asking one more time if he'll form a pact with her, leaving Harris completely speechless. Emma's knight clears his throat and points out that her wording might cause some major misunderstanding, especially since Emma realizes how it sounded and quickly apologizes for the confusion. She gives a proper introduction, explaining she's from the Spadia family and wants to hire Harris as her exclusive magic herbalist. Harris is just standing there in shock, barely able to repeat the part about being an exclusive hire. The group gets into their carriages and starts heading down the road while they talk. The knight explains the real situation, saying their old healer is retiring and they've been desperate to find a replacement. Harris starts to put the pieces together, finally seeing why they came all this way to find him. The knight confirms they had heard rumors about him living nearby in Delos village. Emma says they need to visit the local lords at the Antruth estate next, and the knight adds they have to follow the proper rules since this is basically poaching a worker from the area. The knight bows his head in shame, admitting he was the only guard because they were traveling in secret when the bandits attacked. The original horses got spooked and bolted during the trip, but luckily Lord Rome was able to get a new carriage ready for them. They finally make it to the Antruth residence, which is a pretty massive mansion. Inside the fancy estate, a voice asks Lady Risara how she's been feeling lately, and Risara gives a little laugh, reminding everyone she was just examined the other day. She smiles, saying she's actually doing great since then. Harris is glad to hear the good news and hands over some medicine, telling her to make sure she takes one packet every morning and night. Russell looks pretty surprised by the whole thing, asking if this is another magic herb potion. He's shocked it can treat diseases and not just physical wounds, but Harris just smiles and says it's even better than that. He explains that anyone can make this stuff, even if they don't have magic or special talent. Even though he's doing great, Harris admits his research is only about halfway done. He's still trying to figure out how to cure diseases that everyone thinks are impossible to fix. There's still a ton of work to do, like figuring out how to grow herbs with more magic power in them. Harris looks a bit tired just thinking about the challenges ahead. Lord Bailey tells Harris he's really counting on him for the future, then turns to Russell and mentions how many reliable friends the guy has made lately. Russell watches Harris walk off and admits that at first, he thought the guy was just another corrupt healer from the Holy Institute, but he's clearly seeing things differently now. Russell gets all worked up and tells Harris that he's totally on board with his dream. He's captivated by the idea of a world where magic herbs can save everyone, and he pulls Harris over to Lord Bailey while the others watch the two of them. Rome steps up and introduces himself as the second-generation head of the Stockwell company. He explains that Harris saved his life when he was a kid, so now his whole business is focused on spreading magic herbs everywhere. Then Jurek from the Steel Fangs introduces herself, saying it's a pleasure to meet everyone and that she's dedicated to paying back the debt she owes Harris. Harris looks at his little companion and asks Lisha if she can say hello to the group too, so the little girl introduces herself as Lisha and says she helps Harris grow all his herbs. She starts out casual, but then tries to act all formal and polite, which makes Risara smile as she mentions how happy she is that Harris has found such a great group of friends. Lord Bailey looks over at another guest who just arrived and asks who the little one is, but he quickly realizes who it is and greets Lady Emma. She bows politely, saying she's glad to see the Lord is in good health, and Bailey points out that she came a long way just to get to this frontier. He figures she's only here because of Harris. Emma smiles and tells Lord Bailey he's pretty sharp for figuring things out so quickly. She doesn't waste any time and starts explaining that her family's personal healer is gone, which is a huge deal because the Spade family actually holds a dukedom in the Noel kingdom. They're such high-ranking nobles that people in the region practically hit the floor just hearing their name. Even noble families like the Entrus think the Spades are in a league of their own, but Lord Bailey realizes there's one problem. They can't really do anything without knowing what Harris wants. So he turns to the young healer and asks for his thoughts. Harris looks determined as he says he's honored by such a massive offer, but he tells them straight up that he can't accept it. The group looks on as Bailey points out that becoming an exclusive healer for a duke would mean a guaranteed easy life. He's sure it's a great deal, and Harris admits that the whole thing sounds like a dream proposition, but he tightens his fist and explains that he can't just keep relying on the kindness of others. He looks back at his work and mentions how everyone's help has finally made it possible to grow magic herbs in Delos village. Harris thinks about how Rome and the others have already successfully created magic herb medicine, which means mass production is finally looking like a real possibility, and his ultimate goal is to create a world where every single patient can be saved without any kind of discrimination. So he explains that his next big task is to develop even more medicine and track down rare magic herbs that nobody has even discovered yet. He apologizes for being blunt, but he tells Emma that if he becomes her family's exclusive partner, he won't be able to work on his own terms anymore. So he bows deeply to the nobles, officially turning down the massive offer. Lord Bailey stares at him for a second and says he finally gets it. He understands why Harris was kicked out of the Holy Institute. He gestures wildly while saying it's obvious the temple only cares about sucking up to the duchy, so a sincere guy like Harris was never going to fit in with them anyway. Emma adds that her father, Arnold, is also really harsh toward anyone who lacks dignity, which is why he swore he'd never sign a deal with the Holy Temple. though the guys think he sounds like a total demon. Harris laughs awkwardly and brings up director Dolenz, mentioning how he can easily picture the guy shamelessly flattering any noble just to get ahead. But Lord Arnold is the complete opposite, a man of actual integrity who stands behind the white lily crest of the Spadia family. Emma gives him a soft look and says she totally gets where he's coming from, and she can feel how much everyone supports him. She acknowledges Lord Bailey, Lady Rosara, and even little Lisha as people who truly care about him. The whole room goes quiet for a second as everyone looks at each other, realizing how much Harris has actually done, from his close bond with Rome and Jurek to the respect he's earned from the tough village chief Russell. It's clear that to the people back in Delos village, Harris has become a part of their lives that they just can't lose. Emma looks over at Bailey and admits that even though her father Arnold might have different ideas, she thinks trying to force Harris to join them using their family's power would be a total jerk move that would ruin their reputation, so she's sure her dad will understand. They all stand there in the big hall for a moment, let the weight of the decision sink in, when Harris starts getting all nervous and suggests that maybe he could just visit them as one of his regular stops instead of being exclusive, and Emma immediately grabs his hands and gets right in his face, asking him if he's actually serious about that. Emma looks at the group and says she's totally down for the plan, as long as her family back home is cool with it. She goes on to say she's 100% sure Harris is a guy everyone can trust, especially since his skills with magical herbs are the real deal. Emma smiles and tells him she'll send a familiar if she ever needs a hand with anything, and Harris gets all hyped up, saying he'll show up to help the second she calls, while the rest of the crew stands there watching them, finally looking relaxed now that things are settled. Victoria looks around the room and thinks about how everyone there is so talented. She really wants to find a way to be useful too, but she starts doubting herself, thinking she doesn't have any business sense, fighting skills, or any special powers like the rest of them. Harris steps up with a look of pure determination, saying it means the world to have someone finally recognize him, his research, and his friends. He tells Emma her support is a huge relief, and Emma just stands there surprised, realizing that simply acknowledging his hard work was all he ever really wanted. Rome chimes in, thinking about how massive it is for their reputation just to have a daughter from the Spadia family visiting them in person like this. Emma gets a big smile and says she'll just keep coming back to visit as much as she wants, which makes Bailey pretty nervous. He tries to tell her that calling it official patronage would probably sound a lot better to the public. Emma gets everyone's attention, calling them the Harris Group, which catches Harris totally off guard. She doesn't stop there though, telling the whole room they need to work together to build the world Harris is dreaming of. The group breaks out into a big cheer, and even though Bailey thinks the whole thing is pretty ridiculous, he finds himself raising a fist and joining in anyway. The energy in the room is high as everyone celebrates together. Even the people who usually stay quiet are getting into the spirit, while Lady Rosara watches from her bed. Rosara hears some familiar footsteps approaching the door and just smiles to herself, laughing about how their troublesome child has finally made it home. The others hear her and start wondering who she's talking about, and it only takes a second for the realization to hit them. Suddenly the door flies open and Victoria Antruth bursts into the room, shouting at the top of her lungs that she's back. Everyone just stands there completely frozen. The sudden entrance of the Antruth daughter has the whole room in a state of shock. Harris tries to break the awkward silence by telling Victoria it's been a while and that he's glad to see she's doing okay, but she just stares back at him like she's seen a ghost. She's so shocked to see him in her house that she can't even get a single word out, just standing there stuttering while her head spins. Emma just smiles through the chaos and gives Victoria a casual greeting like nothing weird is happening at all. Victoria screams out, demanding to know why Harris and Emma are together at her house. The shock is so intense that her brain basically stops working for over 4 minutes, while everyone else just stands there watching her freak out. Harris and the others try to get her attention since she's just standing there frozen with her hands on her face. She finally snaps out of it, taking a second to fix her collar and get her act together. Victoria bows deeply and apologizes, admitting she totally blacked out for a second before greeting Harris properly after all this time. She says she's sorry for making such a big scene in front of everyone. Then, she introduces herself formally, explaining that she's currently a student over at the Noel Royal Academy. Victoria goes on to say she got lucky with a natural gift for healing magic, so she's working hard to become a professional healer. From the bed, Rosara lets it slip that Victoria has actually looked up to Harris ever since he saved her life. Victoria completely loses it, blushing hard and yelling at her mom for blurting out a secret she was supposed to keep quiet. Emma is surprised that anyone from her family actually traveled out to this remote estate, while Lord Bailey jumps in and asks if she's really here just to scout Harris. Lord Bailey shuts that idea down quickly, and Emma adds that since they couldn't reach a deal, she was about to head out, which leaves Victoria looking totally lost. Bailey asks Harris if he's really sure about turning her down, pointing out that working for a ducal house would pretty much guarantee his future. But Harris stands his ground, explaining that they already worked out a deal for house calls instead of him being stuck in an exclusive contract. Once she hears the news, Victoria gets all worked up and shouts about how the entire Antruth family is going to be incredibly grateful for the help. Emma starts to speak her mind, which catches Victoria off guard and makes her let out a weird little noise. Emma mentions how they haven't really hung out at the academy, so she's hoping they can use this time to actually get to know each other. She catches Victoria off guard with a nickname and straight up asks if the two of them can be friends. Harris finishes explaining things as Emma officially thanks him and Victoria for everything on behalf of the Spadia family, and Victoria starts panicking, saying there's no way she can be friends with someone as famous and high class as Emma, while Emma just looks at her gloves. Harris takes a look at the girl's hand and asks if it's a magic burn, noting it's probably because she went too hard during her training sessions lately, and Emma chimes in, saying that staying dedicated to a goal like that is impressive no matter who you are, so she asks to personally examine the injury since she'd be genuinely happy to help out a hard worker. She reaches out and tells Victoria she'd be honored if they could just hold hands for a second, which completely blows Victoria away. She blushes and yells that she'd love to, saying the pleasure is all hers while looking totally starstruck by the offer as the two of them finally shake on it. Harris tells Victoria he gets the enthusiasm, but she really needs to stop pushing her body past its limits, and everyone heads out to the front gates where the carriage is waiting to take the guests back home. Harris waves them off, telling Emma to make sure to send word if any other medical issues come up that need his attention, as she leans out the window to say thanks. She mentions her dad is going to be thrilled they don't have to rely on the Holy Institute anymore, which gets Lord Bailey thinking. He watches them leave and asks if Emma has some kind of personal grudge against the Institute, concluding that she probably just hates how they've been acting ever since the leadership changed and things started going downhill. Grassam looks back on the old days, mentioning how much better things were under the previous director, especially since he personally received treatment from Harris and Sir Gustav. He continues, noting that even with Harris's limited mana back then, his hard work as an assistant really stood out, and apparently that's the story that got Lady Emma's attention. Victoria looks on with total wonder, her eyes sparkling like a kid listening to a story about a legendary hero. Grassam explains that's exactly why Emma can't stand the Holy Institute's selfish ways or how they abuse their healing powers, which is news to Harris. Victoria pokes her head out to tell Grassam to wrap up the chat, so the knight agrees and tells everyone they're heading out. Victoria claims she can sense Emma's elegance right through the carriage walls, leaving Harris and the others standing there wondering what kind of aura she's talking about. Suddenly, Victoria realizes she nearly forgot something important. She pulls out a sealed envelope and tells Harris she has a letter from the headmaster, who apparently had something specific he wanted to get to him. As she hands it over, she mentions the only thing she knows is that it's supposed to be really helpful for his medical research. Harris stares at the letter, wondering what's inside, before promising to come by and pay his respects once things are settled at the village. Victoria speaks up and calls out to Harris, catching him off guard just as he was about to head out. She tells him she's been working herself to the bone to become a top-tier healer, but her real dream is to mix that magic with herbal medicine to save as many lives as possible. The girl gets even more worked up, leaning in and telling him that's exactly why she needs to ask him for a huge favor, which leaves Harris standing there stunned as Victoria asks him right then and there to take her on as his apprentice in herbal medicine. She explains that she wants to find the true potential in herb stuff that goes way beyond what regular healing magic can do, while Emma watches from the side, seeing Harris just standing there silently with his back turned. Victoria gets a bit nervous and says his name again, waiting for any kind of answer. Harris smiles to himself as the word apprentice brings back a memory of him as a little kid, yelling at his old man to teach him everything so he could finally help people too. In the memory, his father looks up from his medical gear and tells young Harris that taking on an apprentice is a pretty tall order, especially since he feels like he's still learning himself. But then he pats Harris on the head and says if he's serious about building a new future for medicine, they can walk that path together, a memory that still hits Harris deep. He tells himself he's going to get it right this time, then addresses Victoria, who answers him immediately, ready for whatever he says next. Harris looks at Victoria and tells her that if she's serious about medicinal herbs, her academy studies have to come first, and knowing that he's ready to treat her as a comrade in this new era of medicine, promising to teach her every single thing he knows. Victoria's eyes light up with pure excitement at the news, and she shouts out a huge yes while grabbing Harris's hand, telling him how much she's looking forward to working together. As her carriage starts to pull away, Victoria waves with both arms and yells for him to visit the academy soon because they'll be waiting. A few days pass by. Harris stays busy at the house, mapping out how different plants like coagulation grass and calming grass actually work, while scribbling down exact recipes for stuff like crimson lizard disease and wolf bite disease until he finally finishes the whole guide. He takes the finished notebook over to the group and asks Rome for a second opinion, wanting to make sure the info is easy to follow. Rome looks it over and says it's perfect, noting that since anyone can understand it, the guild can definitely handle the big-scale production now. So with the whole team helping out, they finally get the production of the magic herb potions moving forward. The whole operation gets moving with the people of Delos village taking charge of growing all the magic herbs. And while they handle the farming, the crew from the Stockwell company steps in to manage all the processing work. Even the adventurer escorts start pitching in to help move the heavy crates, making sure everything stays on track. Village Chief Russell gives Harris a solid pat on the shoulder, telling him to head out and leave the village in his hands. Harris pumps his fist and says he's officially off to the academy, feeling ready for this next big step. As they hit the road, Harris thanks Rome for getting the carriage ready, but that's not the only thing he's grateful for, since he also makes sure to thank her for getting Lisha those new clothes. Rome says it was no trouble at all and tells Lisha she looks great, which just makes the little girl giggle with joy. Inside the carriage, Harris starts wondering if it's actually okay for a big-shot company rep like Rome to be traveling with them. So Rome just smiles and tells him it's fine. She's got a team of reliable people back in the village taking care of business. Rome adjusts her new glasses and says she doesn't want to miss any business deals. Harris just asks what's up with the look and leans out of the carriage window as he realizes they've finally made it to the stop. The whole group stands there in front of the Noel Royal Academy. The place is absolutely massive, and they start walking through the bright courtyard past the big fountain toward the main entrance. Jurek looks around in awe at the school, so Harris asks if this is her first time seeing an academy. Victoria mentions she's used to rough adventure towns and dungeons, making Jurek admit this fancy place is a nice change of pace. Harris tells everyone to stay focused so they don't get lost, specifically telling Lisha to stick right by his side, and the little girl shouts that she's got it, while Rome teases Harris about acting like a worried teacher already. Up in one of the academy windows, an old man watches them arrive, calling Harris the demon herbalist, and muttering to himself about how Harris is definitely going to put something to good use soon. Inside the school, a strange glowing egg sits on a table, while a voice mentions how it should help with a certain vision for the world, but it's hard to say what's actually waiting to hatch inside. Back outside, Victoria is all smiles as she throws her arms out to welcome the group. She's clearly excited and says they've been waiting for them to finally show up. Harris thanks her for taking the time to come out and meet them like this, and the rest of the crew just takes in the view as they start walking through the grounds. Harris notes that this is the first time Lisha and Jurek have ever stepped foot in an academy. Victoria starts bragging about the place, explaining that they have everything from high-end gardens to full-blown arenas for the students to train in. Lisha and Jurek look totally impressed, but Victoria tells them they can explore later. Right now, the priority is getting everyone to the headmaster's office. As they walk through the massive hallways, Harris thinks about how this place always feels way too big. No matter how many times he comes back, it's still pretty overwhelming. Victoria keeps up the tour guide act, explaining that the school pulls in people from all over the kingdom for magic, fighting, and regular studies. She says it's basically because the academy only takes the best of the best, which is why the atmosphere is so different from everywhere else. Rome checks out the fancy surroundings and agrees that if the students are all elite, it only makes sense for the school to look this good too. Victoria leads the way through the halls, excitedly telling everyone to follow her as they stop right in front of a set of massive doors. Harris notes that he's been here before, but something about this specific entrance feels different now. He can feel a crazy amount of pressure coming from the room, and just as they're standing there, a voice from the other side tells them to come on in. Waiting inside are the academy's top brass, Headmaster Milos and Vice Headmaster Norman. Milos welcomes them, specifically calling out Harris as the magic herb pharmacist. Harris gives a polite bow, saying it's been a while and apologizing for taking so long to show up for a formal greeting. Milos tells him not to sweat it, mentioning he knows how rough things got for Harris after he was kicked out of the Holy Academy. He goes on to say he even heard about the big invitation Harris got from the prestigious Spadia family, and Harris admits that it's true, but explains that he actually decided to turn that offer down. Milos takes that in and figures that if Harris turned them down, he probably wouldn't be interested in an invitation to join this academy either. Harris starts to apologize, telling the headmaster that while the school environment is definitely great, he's got his own path to follow. Milos watches from the window and asks if he's really the guy traveling around the village to research herbs and help people. Norman points out it's time to get moving, so Harris just confirms that's what he's been up to. Victoria speaks up and asks Harris if he got around to reading her letter yet. He tells her he did, assuming it was about getting him some new supplies for his research work. Headmaster Milos just grunts to himself for a second before calling Norman over to bring out something special. The group looks over and sees a strange, patterned egg sitting in a box. Harris is totally caught off guard. Staring at the thing, Norman explains that it's actually a familiar's egg, and he's pretty sure it's going to be useful for someone with Harris's skills. Harris looks at the egg and thinks about the idea of getting a new familiar. It makes him think of Lisha, who was born from a magic herb and has already helped him out so much with her powers and her kindness. He realizes that if a new partner can support him just as much as she does, he'd be really lucky to have them around. Norman mentions that the egg looks like it's about to hatch any minute, but the contract paperwork is going to take some time, so he suggests Harris goes and checks out the academy while they wait. Harris mentions it's been a long time since they've been at the academy, and he can tell everyone is pretty hyped to see the place. The group walks through the doors and into the main hall, but Harris stops in his tracks when he sees a huge crowd waiting. Students start swarming them immediately, asking Harris for herb lessons, wanting to talk shop with Rome, and even begging Jurek for a spar. Some girls even start asking Lisha to join them for a tea party since she's so cute. Harris is totally caught off guard by the noise, and Victoria stands there wondering why the school is suddenly acting so crazy, until she remembers that she told everyone about how Harris saved the day at her parents' house. It turns out that her story made him a local celebrity, leaving Victoria feeling pretty guilty for causing a scene. She apologizes while Harris just laughs it off, realizing there's no way around it now. Rome says he's actually happy to chat since these students might be future customers, while Jurek and Lisha are totally down to spar and hang out. Harris agrees and tells the students he'd be glad to show them a few things about magic herbs, which makes Victoria jump in and shout that her classes are done for the day, so she's definitely not going to miss out on the action. The whole group gets fired up and decides to turn the day into one big joint training session for everyone. The group gets right to work, with Harris kneeling in the grass to show the students how to handle rare magic herbs nearby. Jurek pulls off a wild flip over a student during a spar while Lisha just kicks back at a tea party. One student looks at Rome with total respect. Thanking him and promising to make his family shop big enough to trade with him, Rome smiles and says he's definitely looking forward to that, encouraging the kid to keep at it. And then the girl sparring with Jurek stops to catch her breath, admitting she couldn't even get close to landing a hit. Jurek shakes her hand and tells her that her swordplay is sharp, but she needs better tactics to beat faster opponents. Over at the tea table, the students thank Lisha for such a relaxed time, and she tells them the pleasure was all hers as the day winds down. A student tells Harris she's definitely coming back after graduation for more magic herb lessons. Harris gives a confident nod and says he'll be waiting for that time to come, while the students stand there in awe, realizing that Harris and his friends are truly on a whole different level. Victoria thinks about how her noble training is okay, but realizes combat skills from the real world are just on another level entirely. Harris speaks up, saying that besides just skill, magic herbs are actually great for building up basic stamina. Victoria looks surprised as he flips through his notes, explaining how specific herbs can stimulate blood flow and help muscles recover much faster than normal. He points out that by mixing these with regular training, you can build a way stronger body, even if the herbs were meant for medicine. Harris then holds out his research notes and tells Victoria he's entrusting them to her, leaving her totally shocked and wondering if he's serious. He tells her he is, but gives her a quick reminder that her regular school studies still have to come first. Victoria hugs the book to her chest with a huge smile, promising she'll definitely work hard enough to meet his expectations. Jurek gives Victoria a fist bump and says they should spar again next time they meet, which Victoria is totally down for. Just then, the vice headmaster shows up and says the contract is ready for them to sign in the office, so Harris and Lisha start following him, but someone suddenly calls out to Harris from behind, making him stop and turn around to see who's there. A group of students gather around to thank Harris for the awesome lecture on magic herbs, even asking if he can come back and teach them again. Harris tells them he's down for it, and plans on making sure everyone understands just how much power magic plants really have. As the kids head off, the vice headmaster watches them go and thinks a dedicated botany department might actually be a thing soon. The headmaster notices how much the students learned today, while Norman thanks Harris for giving them such a productive session. Milos mentions how great it is to see everyone so fired up, saying it's honestly a huge win for him to watch them be that excited. He realizes he's rambling and stops himself, telling Harris it's time to touch the egg and let his magic start the process. Harris reaches out while worrying that his magic reserves are pretty low for a familiar contract. Remembering how the village helped him last time, The headmaster sees him hesitating and offers to step in with some extra mana if he's running a bit short. But just then Lisha walks right up and grabs his hand with a big smile. Showing she's ready to back him up, Harris looks back and realizes she's there to help him out, giving her a quick thanks before they move forward together. Lisha grabs Harris's hand and gets super hyped, telling him it's time for the contract and that they should give it everything they've got. They both channel their energy into the egg, and a massive burst of light fills the entire room as the magic takes hold. Makti and the others watch closely as the egg starts to give way. She points out that the shell is finally cracking, and the light gets even more intense while the egg starts to fully hatch right in front of them. As the glow starts to die down, Harris shields his eyes and realizes that this is the moment they've been waiting for, seeing a tiny, round, owl-like bird sitting there. Someone wonders if this little chick is actually supposed to be their new familiar. The whole group crowds around the little guy on his cushion, with Victoria and Jurek still trying to process that this tiny bird is really a magical familiar. Milo steps in and says it looks like the birth went perfectly, and he's sure it's because Harris and Lisha work together so well. Harris thinks about how their combined power made this happen, then jokes that this basically makes Lisha the bird's big sister. Lisha absolutely loves the idea, looking totally touched and excited to officially be a big sis to the new little guy. Lisha is caught off guard for a second when Harris suggests the big sister role, but she gets totally hyped and promises to do her best. While the little bird chirps along, Norman hands over a manual on how to raise the familiar, mentioning that as long as the little guy gets food and mana from the village, everything should be fine. Harris thanks them for all the help and realizes that before they do anything else, the little bird is going to need a name. He explains that naming a familiar is actually a super important ritual for making the bond between the bird and its owner official. So Jurek pipes up and mentions her old swordmaster was named Nash, pointing out that the bird's features look exactly like his. Victoria is pretty shocked and asks if she's talking about the legendary Nash deal from the Steel Fang clan, known as the Falcon's Sword. The group acknowledges that the clan's legendary reputation wouldn't even exist if it weren't for everything that hero accomplished back in the day. Harris says he's heard all about how brave that warrior was, and he tells the bird he hopes it grows up to be just as dependable. He kneels down and officially names the little guy Nash, asking the bird how he feels about his new identity. The bird chirps happily at his new master, and Victoria mentions it's a huge relief to see the little guy take such a liking to him. Harris tells Nash he's counting on him from here on out, while Lisha gives the little guy a warm welcome. Now that the bond is official, the bird is officially a magic herbalist's familiar. Headmaster Milo suggests that since they're about to head back to the village, Harris should try putting the little guy to work right away. But Harris is a bit skeptical, pointing out that Nash was literally just born and is way too small to actually do anything yet. Norman just laughs it off and explains that the Academy's familiars are on another level. He promises the bird will be ready to help out before he knows it, telling Harris to just touch the magic stone on the bird's forehead and channel a bit of mana into it. Harris is a little unsure about the magic part, but as soon as he tries it, there's a massive flash of light and Nash grows into a giant bird that towers over everyone in the room. Lisha thinks the whole thing is incredible, and Victoria admits that while her guild uses bird familiars too, she's never seen one even close to this caliber. Norman explains that once they're done traveling, all Harris has to do is stroke the stone without using any mana to shrink him back down. He just warns him to be careful not to touch it while they're up in the air. While Norman goes to get a riding saddle ready for the bird, Milos pulls Harris aside to talk about something more serious, asking if he's heard anything about what the Holy Academy has been doing lately. Harris can tell right away that this has everything to do with Director Dolenz. Harris admits to the headmaster that he hasn't heard a single word from his old workplace since the day they kicked him out, but Milos fills him in, explaining that since the sanctuary banished him, tons of groups have been canceling their contracts with them. Norman chimes in to warn Harris to be super careful, since there's no telling what the director might do once he loses his cool. The headmaster tells Harris that when things get tough, the people who actually trust him will definitely be there to back him up, and Victoria and Jurek immediately jump in, telling Harris to leave the Holy Academy to them since their little schemes don't mean a thing. Jurek even promises to just cut down anyone who tries anything. Victoria says she's definitely lending a hand too, and little Lisha makes sure to let everyone know she's not staying behind either. Looking around at his friends and the giant bird Nash, Harris just stands there and thanks everyone for having his back like this. Milo smiles, telling Harris he's lucky to have such solid people around him with a crew like that. He says no problem is going to be too big to handle. The old man admits he's actually got really high hopes for the kind of world Harris is trying to build through his magic herb research, and Harris shouts back that he won't let him down as they all climb onto Nash's back, ready to head out and prove him right. The giant bird takes off, carrying the whole group high above the academy grounds as they start their journey back to the village. Milos and Norman stand together, watching Harris leave with the girls. Milos tells Harris he's got a great group of people who really believe in him, and as Nash flies away, the headmaster adds that everyone at the academy is rooting for him too. The students look up, watching the giant bird disappear into the clouds while Harris looks down, shocked at how fast the academy is shrinking in the distance. Lisha is having the time of her life, cheering about how high they are, but Victoria is absolutely losing it. She's shaking, convinced that if she falls from this height, she's going to end up as a pancake on the ground. Jurek tries to be helpful, casually telling Victoria she'll be fine if she just spreads out the impact when she lands. Victoria looks even more terrified after that, so Nash just keeps diving through the sky. It's pretty obvious that what Jurek said is totally impossible for anyone who isn't a superpowered adventurer. Back at Delos village, Chief Russell is wondering if Harris and the others even made it to the academy yet. One of the guys says it's such a long walk that they shouldn't expect them back for at least a few days, but all of a sudden, a massive shadow covers the ground. Both of them freeze and look up, with Russell trying to figure out what the heck is happening. Lisha starts shouting that she's finally home as Nash lands. Harris looks happy to be back, even though Victoria is still crying from the crazy flight. Everything seems quiet in the village, and that's basically how the whole trip to the academy wraps up. Russell nods along while Harris notices that the village is definitely starting to feel way more lively lately, as the chief mentions that speaking of being lively, the group actually had a visitor show up the moment they left for the academy. Harris is pretty surprised to hear that anyone came looking for them, so he's shocked to see Grassam standing there. Grassam says hello and mentions it's been a few days, but Harris is more focused on the new face and asks what brings them here and who the other guy is, and the younger guy introduces himself as Victor, a member of the Royal Knights of Noel. Harris can't believe it, wondering why someone that high-ranking would be all the way out here. Victor explains that he heard some news from Grassam. He knows all about how Harris signed a contract to handle home medical visits for the Spadia family, and Harris starts to see where this is going. Victor gets straight to the point and asks if Harris would be willing to provide medical checkups for the Royal Knights as well. He admits that most of the knights are honestly getting fed up with the Reynard Monastery lately, since their line of work involves being in constant danger every single day. But the monastery has been totally unreliable whenever the knights actually need help. Victor realizes he's talking trash about Harris's former home and apologizes for being rude, but Harris just tells him not to even worry about it. He makes it clear that he doesn't trust the academy much these days either. Victor says thanks to everyone's help in the village, the magic herb production is moving along great, and with Nash's wings, they can get the meds to the Knights' order in no time. He tells the group to leave the Knights' consultations to him, which earns a heartfelt thanks from Chief Russell as the two sides finally seal the deal with a handshake. Grassam thanks them again for everything, but then his face gets serious. He mentions there's actually one more thing they need to talk about, and Victor takes over, explaining that the knighthood just got some secret orders from the people running things at the top. The mission is to find a very specific special flower, something that seems way more important than just any plant. Victoria hears this and wonders why Harris would be involved in a search for a flower. But then she starts putting the pieces together. Victor tells Harris he's got a sharp eye for figuring things out, confirming that they suspect this flower is actually a rare species of magical herb. Hearing it's a magic herb gets Harris's attention right away. He figures if that's the case, his specific field of study could actually be a huge help. So Victor apologizes since a lot of the details are still pretty fuzzy for the Knights right now. But things get even more complicated when he mentions the Holy Institute is also hunting for the same flower. Harris can't believe his old workplace is already getting involved in this. Harris looks back on his time at the Holy Temple. He used to think they only kicked him out because his herbal medicine was a threat to their healing magic business. But Headmaster Milos had warned him to be super careful. The old man definitely felt like the temple was up to something shady behind the scenes. While the rest of the group stands around looking worried, Harris can't stop thinking about if there's some secret link between this demon grass and the sanctuary that he's missing. It makes him wonder what the deal with this mysterious flower really is. The crew takes a quick flight over to the snowy mountains of the Woodbury Fief, a super remote part of the Noel Kingdom, where Victor points out that a trip that usually takes days on the ground only took them one flight to finish. Harris gives Nash a friendly pat on the head, telling the big owl he did a great job and thanking him for the ride. As they reach Lake Gyojutsu, Lisha gets all excited and tells everyone to look at how beautiful the water is. And Jurek explains that they're at Dawnmoon Lake, one of the kingdom's 3 big mysteries, and the crystal clear water and forests make the whole place look like something out of a dream. Harris takes it all in and realizes that an environment this crazy is exactly where they'd find a rare magic plant like the demon grass flower. Harris thinks about how they've traveled all the way to these mountains because the kingdom's knights asked them to find the rare demon grass flower, and while they get ready, It turns out Rome is staying behind for a bit to get all the supplies ready before meeting up with the group later. The crew arrives at the Woodbury estate in the frontier of the Noel Kingdom. The guards at the gate recognize Victor and let them right in. As they walk through the fancy halls, Harris keeps in mind that the head of this place, Lord Zykel, is actually the brother-in-law to the head of the powerful Spadia family. Since Zykel is a close relative of a duke, Harris knows he has to be on his best behavior to make sure he doesn't mess anything up, which leads to Victor admitting he's always hated these formal events. Harris just laughs and says he feels the exact same way. Victor tells him to just relax and stay cool because it's not like anyone is going to actually try to eat him or anything. Jurek chimes in while playing with her dagger, saying she'd turn anyone who tried something into fish fillets. Harris just hopes she keeps things peaceful. Right then, Lord Zykel Woodbury finally shows up with a big smile, apologizing for making everyone wait so long to see him. Victor tells him it's no problem at all, and thanks the Lord for taking the time to meet with their group today. Lord Zykel gives Harris a look and asks if he's the guy everyone's been calling the weed pharmacist lately, and Harris gives a polite bow, introducing himself properly as the magic herb pharmacist, while Jurek and Victoria stand by. Zykel laughs it off and says he's impressed that Harris had the guts to ditch the Reynard sanctuary to team up with the Stockwells and the Spadia family. Harris just brushes it off, saying he's only been able to do all this because of how nice everyone around him has been lately. The Lord points out that Harris even has a solid connection with the Royal Knights, which seems to make Victor a bit uneasy. As they all move into the sitting area, Zykel keeps chuckling to himself like he's found something really interesting, and in his head, he's already thinking about how this kid is a gold mine and how he definitely wants a piece of that action. He tries to play it cool by warning Harris that being too successful can get a guy in trouble, but Victor cuts him off immediately. Just then, an older knight in heavy armor steps into the room, apologizing for interrupting the conversation as he looks Harris dead in the eye and says he needs to teach the kid a lesson about being so disrespectful. Zykel just laughs the whole thing off, telling them it's really no big deal. He changes the subject and asks Harris if it's true he's there to survey the plants in the great Widmark Forest, and Harris nods, confirming that the High Command of the Knight Order actually gave him a direct order to do just that. The Lord thinks about it for a second and decides it's fine, officially giving Harris his permission to head into the woods. He pulls out a round, patterned transit pass and hands it over, telling Harris he just needs to show it to the guards to pass through. Harris takes the pass and thanks him, getting ready to head out with the rest of his crew as just as they're about to leave, Zykel stops him. He mentions there's actually one last thing he's been dying to ask. He asks Harris why he ever bothered to stand up to director Dolenz, pointing out that he could have lived a totally easy, comfortable life if he just kept his head down at the academy. Harris looks away for a moment, admitting that Zykel is right about that life being effortless. But he looks the Lord right in the eye and says that kind of profit is only possible because they use the patients like shields. He explains that their whole world is built on the suffering of people who can't pay for help, or the ones who lose everything just to stay alive. Harris stands firm, thinking about all the people he's helped and how their smiles matter way more to him than any status in this world. Zykel just laughs at that, telling Harris that he's got some seriously noble goals for a guy in his position. As the group starts heading out, the Lord watches them go, and says he really hopes the day never comes where Harris regrets making that choice. He calls out one last warning, telling them the magical beasts in the forest are total monsters, so they better stay on their toes, and the group finally passes through the massive front gates of the estate. But the conversation about Zykel is far from over as the stern knight looks back with a frustrated look, complaining that there's a limit to how much someone should be allowed to mock others. Grassam tells him he needs to shut it and watch his tongue, reminding him they're still standing on Woodbury land. The knight won't let it go though, asking Grassam if he didn't see the look on that guy's face, like he was definitely hiding some dark plan. Jurek chimes in, noting that despite how he acted, the Lord didn't leave a single opening for an attack, and his guard was just as sharp. She figures that since he's part of the Spadia bloodline, he probably deals with people trying to take him out every day, so he has to be ready. Harris mentions that his main concern is the Holy Order, especially since they might be after the demon grass flower. Grassam agrees, saying Director Dolenz isn't the type to just walk away, and since the Reynard Holy Order is the only medical spot in the whole kingdom, they have massive pull with the nobles and the knights. Grassam admits that as a knight, he wants to believe people aren't just using the order for their own gain, but he knows that's probably just wishful thinking. He brings up a secret mission they're on, hoping that no one shady is working against them from the shadows, as Harris stays quiet for a second before Grassam decides that standing around thinking about it won't actually give them any real answers. Harris shakes off the bad vibes and tells the group that with everyone together, they have nothing to worry about. He tells them he's really counting on them and points toward the horizon, telling the crew it's time to finally head into the Widmark Great Forest. Meanwhile, back at the Reynard Holy Order, someone is absolutely losing their mind and screaming in anger. Dolenz is trashing his office, wondering why the Spadia family and the knights are suddenly making his life a living hell. His assistant tells him their guys are holding everyone back for the moment, but it's only a matter of time before things fall apart. Dolenz takes a drink and complains that the knights are basically his best customers. Their constant injuries are what keeps his business running, and he's not about to let a guy like Harris steal them away. One of his goons speaks up and mentions he heard that Harris and the rest of the group already started moving toward the great Widmark Forest, which is a pretty big deal since everyone knows that place is a total nightmare packed with some of the most dangerous magical beasts around. Dolenz gets this really creepy look on his face and says that if the forest is really that dangerous, then it really can't be helped if a few losers wander in there and end up as nothing more than monster bait. The hooded girl standing nearby just smirks and says that everyone will just call it a tragic accident, mocking how scary the whole thing is. She decides she's going to head out and see how their little bait is holding up, and Dolenz tells her he's counting on her. But she has to make sure she watches everything happen until the very end before he starts laughing to himself. He thinks about Harris and says he'll be sure to offer some flowers at his grave once the monsters are done with him, while Harris and the crew walk into a bright light as they enter the woods. The Witch of the Amberleotes mine watches her crystal ball and sees that Harris and his crew have officially entered the Woodbury territory, which is a problem because those woods are crawling with dangerous monsters, and it looks like one of the really nasty ones is already on the hunt. She looks at the group and realizes there's no way Harris's friends or those young knights can handle what's coming on their own, so she grips her staff and decides that it's finally time to get involved. Macti gets a huge smirk on her face, realizing her time to shine has finally come. The witch gives her the order to go use her magic to help Harris out, and Macti is all for it, happily telling her master she's on the job before the top-tier mage literally dives out of the building, shouting that she's heading out. Watching her go, the witch just sighs and wonders why the girl can't just use a door like a normal person for once. But she quickly shrugs it off since everyone is now moving toward the same goal, to crush the darkness behind the kingdom and build the world Harris is dreaming of. Back at the camp, Rome finally catches up while carrying a ridiculous amount of luggage, apologizing to the rest of the group for making them wait. Victoria shows off her massive backpack and tells the group she's got all the supplies and gathering gear ready to go. Harris gives her a smile and says that definitely helps, but as they settle in, Lisha looks out toward the dark tree line and calls out to Harris. She looks pretty worried and tells him that something about the forest feels off, especially since the moon is high, and the woods are filled with the sound of 1,000 unfamiliar voices whispering in the dark. Harris thinks about the voices for a second and gets a look of realization on his face. He figures those sounds must actually be signs of a new type of magic herb growing nearby. While they rest, Victoria looks over at the trees and admits that a forest filled with monsters makes her feel pretty uneasy, but Harris is already thinking ahead, telling her that if they actually find a brand new herb, they could start making totally new types of potions. Later on, as the whole group moves through the brush, Victor is still thinking about their earlier encounter. He says he still can't believe the way things went down back at the Woodbury estate, and he's clearly still steamed about it. He says it's absolutely infuriating that anyone would call Harris a weed pharmacist or claim he's just making easy money, since that's just pure disrespect. Victoria chimes in while they walk, noting that Lord Zykel doesn't exactly have a great reputation with the people anyway. Rome adds that while having Lord Arnold as a brother-in-law has kept any real corruption from coming to light, the guild is still staying on high alert for any shady business going on behind the scenes. Jurek finally gets why they have to stay so alert and ready to move at any second, seeing as the monsters in the dark aren't just watching anymore, they're lunging out with their teeth bared. Jurek dives right into the pack with her daggers while Grasim clears the area with his sword. And after the dust settles, Harris looks at all the downed beasts and admits he's just glad the group is there to handle how crowded the forest is. Victor starts acting tough, telling Harris to just leave it all to him since the whole fight was a piece of cake, but Grasim shuts him down immediately, telling him to keep his guard up and asking if he already forgot the lesson he learned the other day. Victor starts begging him to keep quiet, but Grasim lets it slip that Victor ended up totally naked last time, right before Victoria yells for Harris to come over. Harris walks over to see what the fuss is about and sees Lisha jumping around a new patch of plants. He kneels down and realizes it's actually a type of magic herb he's never even seen in his life. Victoria keeps the momentum going, pointing out even more rare finds hidden in the brush nearby. Harris's bag is practically bursting at the seams with a huge variety of plants and herbs they've gathered so far. Harris looks at the pile with a big grin, saying he's found so many new types of magic herbs and that the haul is way bigger than he ever expected. Victoria looks up at the thick trees mentioning that even magic herbs usually need sunlight to grow just like normal plants, but things are different here. It just proves how much mana is packed into the soil in this part of the forest. Grassam tells Harris he's happy to see him find something actually useful besides just flowers, and Harris agrees as they keep moving. Harris adds that he really hopes they can find those magic grass flowers just as easily as they found these other herbs, which makes Victoria stop and think for a second about the specific name of the flower he's looking for. She starts wondering why that sacred temple, the one that tried to get rid of demonic herbs, is also looking for these flowers, and what kind of shady plans they might have. But Harris suggests maybe their old boss has finally turned over a new leaf and actually found some kindness in his heart. The whole group just stands there looking completely confused by that idea until Victoria lets them off the hook, telling them she was only joking. Jurek looks pretty serious as she mentions that the corruption they're dealing with isn't going to be an easy fix, and Grassam agrees with her. So Harris suggests they just keep moving and exploring for now. Victoria adds that she's actually excited to keep working with the group as they head deeper. Suddenly, Harris stops and asks if that's the smell of magic weeds in the air again, but Lisha just shakes her head no. She looks up into the thick canopy with a worried expression, saying she's got a really bad feeling about this spot. As she wonders what's causing that feeling, these weird, dark roots start twitching right at her feet. Victoria spots something coming and screams for everyone to look out just as a massive creature drops down on them. Grassam and Jurek slash the wooden monster, shredding it in midair. Grassam stands over the pieces and realizes it was a treant, while Jurek finds it weird that a monster like that would even be in this forest. The guys start to move on, but Jurek tells them to wait for a second because she's looking at the environment and realizes this definitely isn't the kind of place where treants usually live, meaning something is off. Jurek points out that if that thing really was a treant, Victoria wonders why that's a problem since they're literally in a forest. But Jurek explains that treants are actually monsters that only show up in places filled with much stronger miasma. Grassam starts to explain what that implies for them. While Victoria asks what he actually means by that, suddenly, something strikes Grassam hard, forcing a pained grunt out of him as he realizes that the attacker is a wraith, as three hooded skeletal spirits suddenly appear out of thin air. Grassam drops to one knee from the hit, while Harris rushes to check on him, and the girls immediately draw their weapons as Jurek moves in fast to intercept the spirits before they can do any more damage to the group. Grassam grinds his teeth and says that just like the treants, these specters have no business being in this part of the woods. Victoria watches them keep coming and starts to worry that all these monsters appearing in a row might be someone's doing, leaving the whole party back to back as more of the undead spirits close in from every side. Jurek keeps her daggers ready, pointing out that while the ghosts' attacks are easy to read, they don't have a way to finish them off. Grassam grinds his teeth and admits they're lacking a final blow, and since specters usually stick to specific areas, it's standard practice to bring mages or clerics who can use magic and purification. Jurek looks back knowing they're in a tough spot without that kind of help, so Harris just stares at the spirits and repeats the words purification or magic. He wishes they actually had someone with those skills on hand just then. A cheerful voice asks if someone was calling for. The whole group is still surrounded by those hooded skeletons when one of the wraiths suddenly gets blasted apart by a massive wave of energy. The sudden explosion of light catches the party by surprise, and Harris looks over to see Macti standing there with her staff. He recognizes her instantly, but she's not just standing around because she strikes a pose and lets everyone know she isn't finished yet. She's got a huge grin on her face as she tells them that after her first fire spell, she's going to show off a few more moves as a proper greeting. She goes into high gear, casting a frost spell called Ice Storm followed by a sharp wind blade. The attacks rip through the skeletons one after another, and she finishes it all off with a heavy earth hammer spell that completely crushes whatever is left of the monsters. The dust from the explosion settles and everyone just stands there. Harris and the others are totally frozen after seeing that power. Macti strikes a big pose and introduces herself as the beautiful wizard who showed up just in time to save Harris, even though the rest of the group is just staring at her like she's a weirdo. She starts blushing and tells Harris to say something because she feels like a total loser just standing there, so he quickly thanks her for saving their lives. Victoria thanks her too and asks if she knows Harris, which gets Jurek thinking about how close the two of them actually are. Harris just smiles and tells them that she's basically his future wife, and the whole group absolutely loses it. They all scream out in total shock at the same time. He laughs and clarifies that she's actually just a kid from one of his old patients, even though Macti keeps insisting she's dead serious about it. Harris explains that his old patient was Amber, the Witch of the Mines, and she hadn't taken a student in years until she saw Macti's potential. He admits he saw her training back in the day, but even he didn't expect her to get this good. Jurek says she'd heard rumors about the witch taking on an apprentice, but she never would have guessed it was the girl standing right in front of her. The knights are clearly on edge, and Victor mentions how even the royal guard has to keep the witch under strict watch. Victoria looks completely rattled as she explains that this woman is famous for redrawing world maps whenever she gets bored. Macti can only laugh nervously about her master's terrible reputation, admitting that it's all true so she can't even defend her. Harris asks what the student of such a big-shot witch is doing all the way out here, and Macti just giggles before saying her master told her Harris was in the forest. She looks over at the monsters and says the local beasts wouldn't be a problem for them normally, but as she pulls down her hat, she warns the group that someone really dangerous has finally started making a move. Macti suddenly stops and asks everyone if they've noticed that they're being watched right now up in the trees. A mysterious cat-eared girl clicks her tongue and admits that Macti is just as sharp as she remembered. The girl looks down with a smirk, saying she never would have guessed Macti would be the one to show up. While the rest of the group tries to figure out where the eyes are coming from, Macti just talks back to the trees, telling the hidden girl she's not as invisible as she thinks she is. Macti points her hand toward the trees and yells that she's found the person watching them, firing a blast that slams into the ground as she and Harris stand their ground through the flying debris. High up on a branch, a dark silhouette just scoffs at the attempt to flush her out. It's a girl with cat ears who smiles and says she guessed she couldn't fool Macti after all. Victoria asks if they know each other, and Macti explains that this is the troublesome person. She warned everyone about a girl named Shamanina. Macti goes on to say that Shamanina is a criminal who uses forbidden summoning magic, which makes Victoria and the knight realize that all those monsters they fought earlier were actually her doing. Macti looks away for a second and admits the whole mess is basically a family scandal, but she quickly points her staff back at Shamanina, accusing her of just being here to settle a grudge. Shamanina doesn't seem to care and just smirks, saying it's fine since she already found the flower she was looking for. Harris looks up at Shamanina and realizes she might actually have the rare demon grass flower, which Shamanina confirms by holding it up, casually mentioning the plants were right where the notebook said they'd be. Harris is completely floored when he sees she's actually holding his father's old research journal right there in her hand. He stands there in total shock, demanding to know how a criminal like her even knows about Professor Gustav's work. But Shamanina just smirks and tells him he's talked enough, saying her only job left is to round the whole group up. She reaches out as she promises to finish them all off, and suddenly a massive wall of thick fog starts rolling in, completely covering the forest floor and trapping everyone inside. Harris grabs Lisha and pulls her close, squinting through the white mist and yelling that he can't see a thing, but Jurek catches a movement in the haze and screams for everyone to get down. She swings her blade just in time to stop a monster from shredding them. Jurek swings her blade through the air, trying to keep the invisible threats back while Harris and Lisha huddle together, as Shamanina laughs from somewhere in the haze, telling the group she hopes they enjoy being snacks for the monsters she's left them with. Harris starts to panic and asks Macti if she can just use her wind magic to blow the fog away, but Macti shows him her hand as her magic fizzles out, explaining the mist is actually full of a spell that breaks mana apart. She shows him how any spell she tries to cast just disappears the second it leaves her hand, meaning she can't just blast the area clear, and she realizes they're in a really bad spot. Suddenly, a monster with glowing eyes lunges out of the white, and Jurek yells that the beasts are somehow aiming right for them. Victoria watches the fight and wonders if the monsters have some kind of special animal sense to see through the fog, but Macti notices they're being way too precise, almost like every single beast is locked onto one person in the group. Jurek catches on and shouts at Harris to take whatever he's got hiding in his pocket out immediately. Jurek looks over at Harris and asks if that thing in his pocket is some kind of pass, and Macti grabs the round charm and shouts that she knew he was hiding something like this. As Harris struggles to keep his footing in the chaos, he asks what's even going on, so Macti takes a closer look and realizes the charm is actually infused with attraction magic. Victoria notices the monsters aren't attacking as hard now that the charm is out, which makes Harris start wondering if the Woodbury family is actually teaming up with the Sanctuary to steal the magic grass and the notebook. Though he can't figure out their goal, Macti cuts him off and tells him to think later because they need to clear the mist right now. She tries to figure out another way since magic is useless against the fog, when suddenly, Lisha holds up the little owl and tells Harris that Nash wants to handle this himself, and the small bird takes flight, flapping its wings with everything it's got to clear the air. Harris explains that since the owl has wings, it can whip up a wind regardless of how much magic is in the air. And even though Nash is trying, Macti notices the mist is already starting to close back in. They definitely need something more powerful to break through. So Macti starts looking for that one final move to tip the scales. She calls out to Harris, asking if he still has that magic herb medicine he gave her master. Harris asks if she means the stuff he gave Amber, and he pulls the bottle out, telling her he has it, but he's not really sure what she's planning to do with it. Macti just tells him it'll work and calls for the wind to pick up. Suddenly, Nash lets out a massive gust of air that completely wrecks the dark mist and clears the path. The whole forest opens up as the fog disappears, leaving everyone standing there in the clear air. Makti holds up the empty bottle and laughs, mentioning how Harris's special beauty oil actually makes for some great fuel. The whole group just stares at her, totally losing it because they can't believe she just used beauty oil to save them. Victoria starts putting the pieces together, wondering if that beauty oil is the only reason Amber visits Harris for house calls. Makti just laughs and quotes her master, asking if there's actually anything in the world more important than a girl's skin. She even mentions how she got cursed with flowers growing out of her ears for questioning it, which Victoria finds pretty annoying. Harris cuts the chatter and looks ahead, telling the group that they're about to see what's really waiting beyond the mist. As the air clears, a pack of massive, terrifying monsters shows up to block their path. Makti immediately warns the group that these things are on a totally different level than the weaklings they saw earlier. Jurek doesn't waste any time and jumps straight into the fight, ready to test her luck against the new threats. Even the seasoned knight feels the pressure, admitting that these monsters are definitely going to be a handful to take down, while in the background, the hooded girl uses a magic circle to summon something even bigger to finish them off. Watching the whole scene unfold from a distance, Amber just pulls her hat down and sighs, calling someone a complete idiot. Makti stops the group right in the middle of the chaos, shouting for everyone to give her just a second of their time. Victor steps up to hold the line, telling her he'll handle things and asking if she's actually got a plan to get them out of this. Jurek keeps the pressure on with her blades, mentioning that they're going to get overwhelmed if they don't do something fast. So Makti starts glowing as she stands in a massive magic circle, telling them she appreciates how quickly they catch on. She casually asks Harris if he knows about the different types of elemental magic, making him wonder why she's bringing this up now. Harris lists off the 4 elements she was just using: fire, water, wind, and earth, trying to figure out her point, but Makti just smiles and tells him he's right, except that those 4 are only half of what's actually out there. The whole group stops and looks at her in confusion, with Harris repeating her words back and wondering what she means by half, as she charges up dark energy, explaining that while there are 4 mana types, there's a whole other side called anti-mana. Victoria watches the dark power grow in Makti's hands, looking pretty worried and saying the whole thing looks dangerous. Makti starts laughing, looking totally hyped because she finally gets to use what she learned during her training with her master, and she begins concentrating all that power between her hands, explaining that she's literally crashing mana and anti-mana together to create her ultimate trump card. The monsters realize they're in huge trouble and start panicking as she aims the orb right at them. It lets off a massive, blinding flash of light that completely swallows up the entire battlefield and leaves nothing but an empty wasteland behind. Makti just smirks at the total annihilation while Harris and Victoria stand there stunned.